Hi, good morning, good afternoon, or good day and evening, wherever you may be coming from. It's another LinkedIn live stream from Veeam Software. And even before I introduce my usual co host, Jason Buffington, when we say wherever you're coming from and wherever you're at, we mean it. And so, right off the bat, we want to show you what probably already is a blank map. And in the comments, oh, it's not blank, thankfully. So we've got Jason accounted for in Texas, me, and I'm back in Arizona. We've got Mark, our producer, in Georgia. And we may actually have a few other people joining us from that state as well. But whatever state you're from in the USA or in Canada, and of course, globally, we usually manage to hit, Jason, about 24 or so countries globally by the time we sign off the air. We're always keen to try to break that record. So in the LinkedIn comments during the live stream, please give us a shout out, a hello from somewhere, or just even say exactly where you're from and nothing else. That's all good. We've got a team standing by. So, Jason, we'll check on that. But now, without further ado, my guest and co-host, Jason Buffington. Good morning, good day.
Good morning, my friend. How are you?
I am good. I am set up back in Arizona here, and it's nice to be back in really hot weather. And I guess you're getting some of that too these days, right?
Yeah, it'd be nice if it got underneath 100 for a couple of days, just so I could start getting outside again.
Well, that's why we got into data protection. One of the many reasons, because we're indoors, we're cooled, we're chilled, we're grateful. But today's topic, Jason, is going to be around backup appliances. And we had a little bit of fun with the title, but we'll actually kind of unpack this in a couple of different ways, meaning sort of pros and cons and look at history and whatnot. And I know that you are a history buff, by definition, really. And in some of those books in the background, you do a lot of this for fun. But as it relates to this industry in backup and recovery, maybe just a little bit of a chat through the history of backup appliances might be a good way to open.
Yeah, I was starting to make a list of all the various appliances that had started, and you and I have been in the data protection industry for roughly 30 plus years each. And as I was going through, I actually was stumped. I started going through some old market share data and some old marketing language. But let's kind of take a walk through memory lane. So 32-ish years ago, you and I both started backing stuff up, right? One way or another. And TSM was still kind of in the enterprise. That was, the solution that really kind of defined things even before arguably NetBackup did. So when TSM first came out, I don't have data that far back. Was that the era that data protection appliances really took off?
Unfortunately, no. I can tell you firsthand because, to the best of my knowledge, there was one other vendor out there that really kind of had the first backup appliance. But I was part of the development team in version 2 of TSM, or then it was ADSM, that came up with a backup appliance. And I was actually telling Jason just literally seconds before we went live, that backup appliance was about the size of my study. I mean, it was a 3466 automated tape library that's bigger than my Camaro by far, weighs twice as much probably. It had AIX, multiple servers, and AIX as the operating system. It had now defunct 7133 SSA disk, but basically, even in those dollars in the late 1990s, you couldn't purchase that realistically for under $250,000 in 1990s dollars. And eventually that platform was sunsetted. So needless to say, it didn't take off. It didn't resonate with vast portions of the market.
Now, even back then, 30 years ago, there were kind of two reasons why you might think about a data protection appliance. One was if it came from the original vendor, like the scenario you described, there was this huge monolithic set of, we could do more capabilities, but it really presumably takes the primary vendor of the software stack to build out the whole thing. So that was one potential offer. But then it got so unwieldy and so expensive that, as you said, no one ended up buying it. The other way that some people look at appliances is, this is too hard to install. Could I please just have somebody buy the metal for me, make sure it's right size, install it for me so I don't have to pay for professional services? Basically, what you did was you outsourced professional services. Somebody else did setup.exe, next, finish, stuck it back in the cardboard, shipped it to you. with stuff that you could have built on your own, right? And so those are the two markets for how appliances came together. So let's fast forward 10 years. So you're no longer at IBM. I'm out at Microsoft. It's the Windows era, right? So backup exec was kind of king for the day, in part because what they did with NT Backup Utility. Commvault was kind of cutting their teeth a little bit. They had some interesting stuff they did with Exchange. The lovable BE 3600 and all of its predecessors and success. Well, there weren't any successors. It died after that. But anyway, was that the era that appliances were really the predominant or de facto standard for data protection?
No, it actually wasn't. And, just commenting, on that one vendor, I was actually surprised that the backup exec or BE3600 didn't take off. Although ironically, I just can't help but say this. The number one requested feature on that was tape. Tape out was the number one requested feature for the appliance. But no, and you would have thought maybe, the mid-market in particular, you'd say, well, larger enterprise, for the net backup era, they may actually have more skill, and the mid-sized market may want kind of more of a easy consumption kind of a model, and a lot of channel partners like Dell, for example, selling that. So you would think that would have been the time, but no, the BE3600, and even since we're on that one vendor who at this point is still the market share leader, even the NBU appliances, to the best of my knowledge, have less than a quarter of their install base attached to their own appliances. So the industry's most prolific vendor based on dollars or market share only enjoys sub 1 out of 4, closer to 1 out of 5 attach of any kind of appliance.
Sure. And that's only number of corporate logos that actually are using it somewhere within their environment. If you look closer at how they acknowledge that math, there are some fun things that go now. Okay, so let's fast forward another 10 years, right? So I've now so you're now fully seated at Gartner. I've left Microsoft and I'm now in the vendor community. Virtualization is all the rage, right? You can't go through a major airport in the early 2000s without seeing ads for, Barracuda this and Barracuda that, right? And Commvault tried to do the hyperscale thingy, right? But really in that data center enterprise model, really the juggernauts to watch during that era on raised floor was, Veritas versus Dell EMC. And you have to take out the data domain part of that because that's a target. It's not what we're talking about when we talk about appliances. But surely was that the era of when appliances were the predominant form factor?
No, short answer. And you can see sort of a repeating, theme here. And that's not to say that there cannot be good applications for appliances, but I'm just simply answering, the question, when has it ever been the predominant deployment model? And the answer so far is no, and now no again. And, there's a variety of different vendors. There's a variety of different eras, meaning eras in terms of time, but to your point, eras in terms of, the favorite operating systems even. And we still see, a consistent theme here.
Yeah. All right. So I just wanted to have a little bit of fun with that, just to kind of point out, the appliances are not a new thing. Anyone who says, ooh, this is all nice and shiny because look, it's time to value. There's always been that promise, right? It never actually came to fruition as something which effectively changed how customers wanted to consume or drive data protection. So before we actually get into the industry data, as far as, what are folks looking at for today, should we go hit the map?
Let's definitely hit the map. Yeah, I understand we've got a couple new countries. That's Dubai, Mexico, near both of us.
All right. Hey, UK's in the house.
Yeah, United Kingdom.
Good afternoon, peeps. Let's see. You got some Michigan, Argentina. Nothing wrong with that.
India. We get amazing representation from India, and actually a lot of South America. Got to give a shout out there. Holland. I don't recall seeing Holland before. I could be mistaken, but thank you. Spain, Belarus. We've got, look at the Pacific Northwest is lighting up. That's kind of unique for us. Idaho and Oregon, Seattle, and that's awesome.
I guess I need to hold the rest of my Microsoft jokes to myself for the rest of the hour then. All right. So, but please keep piling on to where you're coming from. We really would like to know. So let's go back to the data. Now, one of the challenges that I found when we were looking through data around appliances as a consumption factor and as a desired outcome is not a lot of the industry analysts actually still do it. In fact, the last report that I found that actually got into any specificity on why you might choose a data protection appliance versus just a roll your own was actually research that I did, and that's 5 years old. But let's go ahead and take a look at the first slide of data when we looked at, what do customers look for when they're looking for an integrated appliance? And the definitions that we used back then, I think they still hold true today. We talk about data protection appliances, or in some cases, the purpose-built backup appliance. Whatever you want to use for jargon for that. You want to make sure you're clear on: are you talking about something where the software and the hardware is integrated as a complete turnkey outcome? Or are you just talking about a target? Now, if you're just talking about a target, it's data domain, it's store once, Quantum DXi, Exagrid. It's folks that where the software still has to do some of the heavy lifting before you get there. On the integrated appliances, what folks actually said they were looking for: number one feature was security and encryption features. Number two was dedupe efficiency. Third was cloud extensibility. There was a longer list, but this was the top 5. And then you get to the latter two, which is ease of acquisition and ease of management. Dave, I think one of the things that's really interesting to me on this is the top 3 things of what you're looking for in an integrated backup appliance have nothing to do with the form factor itself.
Yeah, that I was just kind of realizing that when you were unpacking the slide, how far down the ease, meaning of acquisition or of ongoing maintenance, was when kind of the popular logic or sort of public opinion is typically, well, it's a consumption model. It's because of, back when Hewlett Packard was delivering all-in-one printers, literally you could take it out of the box, feed it power, and then feed it connectivity, and you were kind of off and going. You had like a little chart that showed you how to do that. And that was part of their differentiating value was, how easy it was to go take home and get going, get your first, printout or scan or what have you. But
right.
Here, your data clearly shows that, that wasn't the overriding reason. It was to achieve an additional outcome other than just standing up and getting the system running.
Absolutely. Let's go back and look at, let's say you weren't looking at an integrated backup solution. Let's say you were decided you were going to be looking for a dedupe target. You were going to use whatever backup software you already had. You're just going to use a target. Take a look at what folks are looking for. Number one feature, again, security and encryption. Number 2, cloud extensibility. Number 3, the ability to replicate to other devices, which again, from a dedupe actually is kind of interesting. Number 4, they'd like it to dedupe with the software, and then long-term retention. Again, nothing here really drives the form factor. This is really around a solution stack outcome, and arguably most of these are driven by the capabilities of the software, not the stack. I think that's really interesting.
That's actually a very good point. It is not the inherent architecture, meaning the infrastructure that's helping you achieve the outcomes. And, to be fair, I mean, in almost every appliance that I can think of, let's take that IBM example out, the actual infrastructure is not developed, or the intellectual property of the vendor, meaning, they're not making the ASICs, they're not making the HDDs or the SSDs or what have you. It's oftentimes relabeled servers and relabeled kit, whether it's Supermicro or EMC was purchasing from Dell, actually even prior to becoming Dell EMC on some of the nodes themselves, meaning Dell and Avamar had a combination. And in fact, Data Domain, their CEO initially, before EMC acquired them, used to say, the greatest thing we are doing from a hardware perspective is riding the Intel chip curve. And what he meant by that is the faster the Intel chips go, the faster they're going to be able to do the math to be able then to number crunch and get the deduplication efficiency, or that dedupe ratio that is highlighted in your research as being one of the top desires.
Now, I want to be really, really clear. And so folks are listening at home, let's make sure that that they hear this. We are not in any way bashing the concept of purpose-built architectures for the sake of data protection. I am a huge, ridiculous fan of deduplication style target repositories. I listed some earlier. You can rewind it and play those. I'm a huge fan of dedupe targets because there are some things that really are better done in hardware than in software, and dedupe is one of them. Can I get an amen?
Amen.
All right. So we are not bashing targets. What we are bashing is there really is the promise of time to value really that different when and right sizing with an integrated solution versus just buying best of breed components that are actually consistent with the rest of your infrastructure. So in the same research, the research firm also asked for those customers that chose a integrated appliance over using a dedupe target, why did you do that? And then we asked, hey, if you chose the other way, why did you do that? So let's bring up the next slide on data. And so for those folks that chose to use an integrated backup appliance instead of going out and just buying a dedupe target, the main things of what they were looking for. So they wanted a turnkey outcome, right? They wanted to be able to easily manage both the hardware and the software. This one didn't ever really make sense to me. They could also store their data to tape. A dedupe target doesn't normally have a tape out, so I can totally see how you do that. And then you don't have to buy anything else. Okay, so those are the reasons why you bought an integrated over. But let's go ahead and put the other side up, and then we can nerd out on it. For those folks that bought a dedupe target, instead, what they were looking for, because they thought they could more easily dedupe, right? You're buying something purpose built. That makes sense. It comes from the same vendor. We should talk about that for a minute. The storage appliance could also be utilized for directly from production workloads. I'm thinking this is more like Oracle RMAN talking to DDBoost is probably an example of that. And then lastly, storage appliances can be scaled up linearly. Those last 2 points I think are really, really interesting because after I did this quant research, I went off and interviewed CIOs. Hey, why do you make the choices that you did? And at the time, again, it was there was a one enterprise software company that we talked to earlier, and they were shipping appliances. And what the CIOs would tell us on a very regular basis was, hey, we liked these for some deployments. But then as soon as we maxed out the capacity of what was in that 2U or that 4U box, we scrubbed it, we repurposed the metal, and we went straight back to a dedupe target and rolling our own. And I heard that consistently. I'm telling you, in variations of 17 out of 20 interviews I did, that was consistent. So I think it's really interesting when folks talk about scalability and flexibility of the metal, that almost always eroded the argument over time. What did you hear during those years?
Yeah, very similar. And that was the challenge ultimately with the IBM appliance, the 3466 Network Storage Manager. Is it was nice to be able to get something in that, the microcode levels were going to be right, everything was going to be self-configured, but then eventually someone wanted something custom. They wanted a little more disk, or they needed more tape drives, or they wanted more tape cartridge holding capability, or they wanted the next revision of AIX, or go on and on and on. So it was some aspect of how their environment was that they wanted to optimize for. And it goes back to your best of breed discussion. The flip side is the lowest common denominator approach good enough for your needs? And there's certainly cases when the answer is yes, but there are sometimes, examples where either no, I need to optimize differently, or no, my needs change. And maybe it's just because data grew, or maybe it's because suddenly now you've taken on different kinds of workloads or applications, or maybe it's even, what's changed is the economy, and I want to be able to repurpose existing hardware, instead of go buy sometimes at extra margin different appliances. But before I double click too much on that, and I've got a fun graphic we can show in a little bit, let's hit the map again, because I'm being told that we've got a number of other places that have now signed in. Alberta, I see. We've got Pennsylvania. We've got Indiana. Jason, we've got some more Central America coming in as well.
All right. Little
Toronto,
Switzerland in the house.
Canada.
Cool.
Yeah. Switzerland. Very nice. Awesome. Thanks. Please keep it coming. We'd love to see the map light up. And speaking of sort of things light up. I think this is a good point. If we can show a graphic, it's kind of a fun graphic, but it's making a serious point actually. And if we show this graphic, it's really like everything we've been saying throughout the history of now, whatever it is, 5 months of our live streams, which is nothing is inherently good or bad, right, Jason? I mean, there are good reasons to do things. Good technologies abound. A technology is not inherently good or bad, nor is a form factor, nor is a delivery model. So if you are a science fiction fan, and a lot of people in technology are, you might be familiar with Battlestar Galactica, the Cylons, which were semi evil machines. I guess I will call them evil because, well, they wanted to kill the humans. So they were nicknamed toasters. So, in that context, over on the left-hand side, the toaster, wanted to do you harm. On the right-hand side, the toaster wanted to help you, be of service. And that actually is what I would say, not just about this topic, but we've had pretty frank conversations about the pros of tape. There's some cons, but there's still some very good reasons for tape technology as well.
If we had more time, I'd walk you through. There's a really interesting history of the toaster. The toaster was not originally thought of as this landmark type of device up until sliced bread became a commodity, and the bread makers actually decided what consistent cutting was going to be. And only when there was a confluence of new technologies did the toaster actually take off. We could say the same thing about cloud. I still can't imagine a scenario where data protection appliances fits into that realm, but all of those devices start as well-intentioned incremental enhancements, right? And then over time, what you find is that no, it's an unwieldy beast that you actually can't solve for. You could make the same case that for every Siri and Alexa that's out there, there is a Skynet from the Terminator movies. It seemed like a good idea until you actually put it in, and then it ended up ruining the human race, which I think is where the next round of data protection appliances will eventually go. That was funnier in my head than it was in real life. All right.
That perfectly checks out with 2020, though. It's the year when even murder hornets don't make the front page news because there's just so much other stuff going on.
But let's talk about this. So when you talk about appliances, what you really ought to be talking about is what are you trying to solve for, right? So if you're trying to solve for right sizing, making sure the hardware and the software matter, that's a great time to involve channel partners and consultants in making sure that you have the right pieces and parts. And putting on my Veeam hat for a second, we have reference architectures that'll tell you this is the recipe list. We're not going to bake it for you and ship you the cake, but we will send you, this is the recipe. And if you follow these instructions, you're going to have a great cake every time. So there's right sizing. Then there's time to value. And in time to value, the problem that most people have with appliances is we're not talking about the 2U box that comes out of the cardboard. Someone else ran setup.exe for you and it's ready to go. When most people talk about appliances today, they're talking about multiple pieces of metal, multiple pieces of interconnections, cluster-based architectures. This is not your daddy's appliance. Fair?
Well, that's very fair. In fact, I would actually argue one of the newer, well-known secondary storage appliances, in my mind, one of their great value propositions is that additional connectivity, meaning to your point on networking, I've seen the networking guide, installation guide on that, but what I think is impressive is the level of resiliency. But to your point, it isn't that Hewlett-Packard feed it power, feed it one Ethernet. It is a take every node, dual NIC, prepare failover, have timeout on the communications, etc. But you get an extremely resilient implementation as a result. And we'd be remiss, Jason, if we didn't mention Nutanix Mine with Veeam for those looking for it from a Veeam perspective, an appliance as well. Furthering the point that there's not a anti-appliance sentiment. It's really going back to you need to solve what's most important for you and what you think is going to give you flexibility going forward.
Right. And if you think back on the day that we talked about earlier, there's more than one way to achieve those outcomes. But the bottom line is if folks were looking for security, they were looking for cloud extensibility, they were looking for scale, right? You can get that without an appliance. But if you want an appliance because of from a purchasing preference perspective, from a supportability perspective, one throat to choke, actually, we're not supposed to use that anymore, one hand to shake, however you want to use that phrase, there are reasons why to get an appliance as a delivery consumption model, and Veeam has consumption options for that. just don't think that the only way that you get the ease of management or ease of deployment is it's got to come out of the cardboard pre-configured, because even those don't.
Yep. Very, very fair point. And so, speaking of research, take us through, you've shown some of the past research you did a few years ago. Give us a little quick highlight for the QR code we're seeing here.
So for the QR code, so there it is. So the data protection trends report for 2020. So this was 1,500 enterprises from around the world asking about what are their challenges, what are their core IT goals. Dave, we're just about finished with getting the survey questionnaire live for the 2021 version. That's going to start asking folks the new questions starting in late September. So we're going to have new data for 2021. In that case, we're going to 3,000 respondents over 40 countries. It ought to be just mammothly huge along the way. But this report actually does give us a lot of really good insights for what is driving data protection. Where does data protection fit within digital transformation? What are folks trying to accomplish besides just back up and restore? What other business outcomes come out of that? So there's a lot of great data in that. It was a fun report to work with you on. And so certainly it's free to anybody who wants it. So please hit the QR code along the way. So my friend, we have 3 minutes left. What's on the docket for Friday? What's other than the fact we need to get more countries on the map, because I want to make sure we beat Rick Vanover and his Friday stream. But
yeah, speaking of Friday, we do have Rick Vanover coming back along with Melissa Palmer, and they're going to be continuing a focus that we've had over many months on ransomware. And so really Rick and Melissa's theme is going to be teeing up what do you need to know and maybe do a little bit differently in Q3 of this calendar year to better remediate against cyber threats and ransomware. And part of the reason for this ongoing discussion is we really don't think security or ransomware is something that you're ever done with. I'll give another quick shout out. Actually, tomorrow at about 7 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time, I'm going to have a podcast that drops. It's a podcast called Data Protection Gumbo. It's been around for a number of years and had a little bit of a hiatus between season 2 and 3. About 2+ years ago, after VeeamON 2017, back when I was at Gartner, guested on there in season 2, and got another episode drops tomorrow on that. And we'll just maybe wrap up with one other shout out and then answer one question that came in. Another shout out is a week from today, Jason's getting some time off for good behavior, and I'm going to have a guest, Krista Maycomber from Evaluator Group. We'll be going through a conversation. We are actually working with Evaluator Group on some of the upcoming research that Jason mentioned, but she's going to also share some recent backup as a service research that Evaluator Group has recently concluded. And Jason, though, we did have one question I see from Aldis. Any thoughts on StorageCraft OneSafe deduping appliance for use with Veeam 9.5? Really quickly, I have to say, I love OneSafe. I remember when it was Exablocks. It was really cool technology where you bring your own storage media, because the thought process was you could go buy them, or now take them off a mail order place like Amazon, get that media less expensively than a lot of the storage vendors were going to charge you. So my thoughts would be, it's like many good dedupe targets. I think that's a fine dedupe target as well. Jason, I'll give you last word.
So yeah, I think you said it fine. I will tell you that in my own Texas lab, I use a myriad of different targets for different outcomes. And one of the things I love about it is the fact that all of them work with Veeam, right? So if that's what fits your model, then yeah, go for it. Now I've been running 10. I just upgraded 10A over the weekend. So if you haven't done that, you should absolutely do that as well. There's some cool features, especially around object, which are ridiculously wicked fast. But that's my last word. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Stay safe, stay positive, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Bye-bye.